before you connect the dots, make sure the dots are real. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to the Virtue Signal. I'm Bill Whittle with my friend Alfonso Rachel, and this is the show where we try to talk a little bit about some of the things going on beneath, behind, above, below the politics of the situation. Zoe, I got a problem, and I know a lot of other people have this problem, and maybe you have this problem too, so I thought maybe we could talk about it, see if we can make some sense out of it. A couple shows ago, we did a segment called Telling the Truth, where we were trying to figure out how you can tell what is true. Mm-hmm. And when you look at what's going on out there in the world today, there's just so many things that are just monumental that have a real bad smell to them, you know? Something fishy, really smells fishy. Mm-hmm. Now, on the spectrum of extremes, that's the best way to figure out a spectrum is to go to the two extremes, right? Mm. On one hand, all the way on one side, there are people who think that everything is hunky-dory. Certainly may be a series of bad coincidences, but the system is working and all of the actions taken during the pandemic were reasonable and you know, all of this, right? Everything is pretty much normal. Then on the other far side of the spectrum, you got people who believe that there's either a guy or a small group of guys that are pulling levers and saying invade Ukraine now or this or that, you know, and that everything is under control of, like, everything is under control. And I find myself between these two positions, and I find myself used to living very close to things are more or less, you know, the way they seem. And as time goes on and evidence accumulates, I find myself drifting more and more and more towards some kind of uber explanation of what's going on, because some of these things seem to be so big and so nefarious, and there's evidence for them. So not so much about the specifics. I'm not trying to make the case for that. I thought we could talk today about skepticism versus naivete, and where the balance is, and why it's probably wrong to be on either one of those poles. Right? The naive view is that nothing is going on, that everything in government is accountable, that Jeffrey Epstein did hang himself, for example, during that 12-minute video blackout. That's the completely naive perspective. The completely skeptical perception is that nothing happens without control of the World Economic Federation or something like that. I happen to think that the difference rather between these two is getting narrower, and I find myself more and more finding myself towards the very skeptical position. I still don't believe that everything is under control, but I do believe that some of the very large-scale things we've seen, Hillary Clinton walking free, election irregularities, we'll say, these flagrantly anti-scientific and contradictory mandates during the lockdown, all this stuff. So just for the sake of the general argument, would you rather be completely skeptical, or would you rather be completely naive, or neither, or both?
I'd have to go with neither. I'd rather not be either one of those things. And I think, hey, as I'm an American, man, I can have the choice to not be either one of those, right?
And every individual has their own choice, and every single individual has got a slightly different position.
Indeed, man. And choices, they come with consequences, and not all consequences are bad. There's just going to be, something that's going to be subsequent to that. Now the thing about, I guess to your point about this stuff being controlled, I would say, yeah, there's a lot of this stuff is orchestrated. Now, Biden...
Orchestrated, I'm sorry to interrupt you, man, but that's a much better word. That's the word I should have been looking for than controlled. Okay. Controlled means you got like a little, it's like a radio control airplane. I'm not talking about, I don't mean that. But certainly the ability to, for example, when the Democrats said during the Obama administration, never let a crisis go to waste, right? That kind of thing. Orchestration of events.
Yes. And even Biden with, his buffoonery, this inept guy who just really, this gaffe machine who gets out there and says things like, dude, you don't, why did you say that? And well, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm just one of those, Bill, that doesn't like to lean on Biden having like a mental illness. Even if he does, this stuff is still orchestrated. Democrats are going to do a lot of damage. By the time people figure out, it's like, dude, this guy is a burger short of a Happy Meal and Kamala is not far behind him. By the time they do what they've done, the damage is going to be done. And the damage probably almost maybe irreparable. From where do we go from here? I don't know. But this is orchestrated. And I don't like to say that. I prefer to say that these people are evil geniuses. I don't like to use the language that they're off their rocker and stuff like that, because these off their rocker people got past us.
No, they're not off their rocker.
Right.
No. I don't believe that.
Yeah. It's like Trump, despite all the MAGA, and he's going to drain the swamp and all that sort of stuff. Hey, they were still able to cheat their way into the White House. He's still president as far as I'm concerned, but they occupy the White House. They're illegitimate. So, but this stuff is being orchestrated. Man, they run all the institutions of influence. They're in everything. And people are sending their kids to their institution of influence. They got a whole army, right, of people out there ready to let this stuff go. And people are being outraged about certain things that's pointless to be outraged about. And Democrats are controlling the narrative. They're controlling the language. They're in control of all of it. And so to answer your question, yeah, man, it's there's an orchestration that is definitely going on, and conservatives need to be mindful to not be played, because unfortunately a lot of Republicans, the Democrats, have getting as far as they are in promoting their lies, obvious lies. I mean, it cracks me up when you have these same godless liberals who try to say that we Christians believe in a Bible that's full of contradictions. Democrats are contradictions all day. And that's one of the reasons why I believe the Bible itself, is because I don't want to be in you guys' same frequency. You guys hate the Bible more than anything else. Doesn't matter any other religion. They got tolerance for those. But that Christianity thing, they particularly don't like, as they sit there and contradict themselves. Biden contradicted himself. I don't know how many times this past, couple weeks, right? Contradicting themselves all the time. They contradict themselves on science. They contradict themselves on history. They're totally dyslexic and contradicting on everything while trying to lecture us about what a contradiction is. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to be on your frequency. I have a basis of truth that I am going to stick to, and y'all ain't taking that away from me.
Yeah, just this last couple of days, as we record this, we've watched them contradict themselves on contradicting themselves.
Yes.
And now you reach the level of like the sublime, like, oh, now we're in a metaphysical kind of a thing.
Yeah.
I think I probably, I can answer that question about whether I would rather be 100% naive or 100% skeptical. In other words, would I rather believe everything or believe nothing? I would rather believe everything. But as time goes on, I try to. There's a great danger in believing in things that aren't true. Not only is there a danger of being wrong, but there's also a danger that you can consume yourself in the process. So whenever I look at the situation, especially when I end up having to move my position down that spectrum of naivete and skepticism, whenever I find myself moving, I always have to ask myself, is there grounds for this, right? Are there grounds for this? When Hillary Clinton walked free after obvious violation of federal law, I said something's wrong. When James Comey, and we find out the FBI was behind all of this Russian collusion allegations against Donald Trump, and that it was instigated by the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton, I move again. When they tell me that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide during a 12-minute break in the video cameras, so suddenly went out and went back on again, I move again. When I hear from Dr. Fauci, Center of Disease Controls, and all the other experts that we must lock ourselves indoors unless we have to go up for a government-approved protest, in which case it's okay to go out and stand cheek and jowl next to people, but be sure you lock yourself in when you come back. I move again. When they say that you must be vaccinated with 4 booster shots, but natural immunity doesn't count, I move again and again and again. And I've been moving a lot lately. And so I wanted to talk to you about the process by which we can know to what degree this is real and not find ourselves going beyond the limit of what the evidence is, because we have been under attack for so long. The reason that a lot of progressives will say, I don't know what you guys are talking about. I don't see why you shouldn't trust the news. And my answer is, that's because the news has not been lying about you for 20 years. When somebody tells a lie about you, you know it's true because they're lying. If somebody tells a lie about somebody else, you have no way to know if that's true or not. So here's the thing that I worry about. On one hand, I worry about people who can't see anything wrong, and I think it's because the idea of that kind of evil or that kind of damage, you talked about damage, that kind of damage could already be done to our institutions. They just don't want to believe it. But I also worry about the other end of the spectrum, Zoe, because we have been lied to and attacked, and so many of the things we love have been destroyed by the left, that I'm noticing a trend that if the left says, if an apple drops off a tree, it'll fall to the ground, and we have an immediate inclination, no, it won't. You know what I mean? And I'm not doing this to criticize our team. I understand exactly where it comes from. I'm doing this to keep us on the side of truth. That's what this show's all about. That's the ultimate virtue, in my opinion, is truth. Everything else is, if something's not true, everything that follows is not going to last. So what do you think about these two dangers? What do you think about the danger of not being able to accept the fact that there's something wicked this way comes, versus every time any leftist says anything, if they beat us to the punch, if they say anything like gravity is a law, no, it's not. What do you think about these two positions, and what can we do about that?
Well, I'm gonna reiterate, because I think it's a great example. Like when you talk about this extreme of the apple falling tree and it hits ground, it's like, no, it's not. A great example of that. And don't get me wrong, because I don't put nothing past Democrats. I don't put nothing past what they'll do.
I agree.
But
I just need to see some evidence for it.
Sure. And they give plenty of it. The word says, when we're talking about love, it trusts all things. Now, that doesn't mean that when we're talking about trust, we're not trusting to the degree of naivete. We're talking about the trust in the sense of the confidence and the courage. If you don't have a sense of trust, you're going to be walking around in fear. That's the thing about it. That's why it says love, trust, right? So you can't have this fear. You have to have a sense of trust. And you can't go to the extreme of, just like you were saying, with Democrats, well, we don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction of just because they say, no, it's not, that's not true. And I'll give a great example of that right now, Bill. When Democrats say we have a problem of systemic racism,
right,
white privilege, white supremacy, the typical conservative response is, no, we don't. And that's been to our detriment. The biggest weapon the Democrats have is the race baiting tool. That's their biggest weapon. That's how they're doing all the damage that they're doing.
Absolutely, yes.
And right when they make that charge, Republicans say, no, we don't. There is no systemic racism. There is no white privilege. And when they do that, they wipe the Democrats' slate clean for them and try to make corrections. No, it's not white privilege. It's liberal elite privilege. It's like, no, it's white privilege. Don't let them they're basically handing their weapon to you on a silver platter. They're marking an X of where you can say, oh, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to trip and fall on purpose and fall on my own sword. Here, you can put the sword where you want for me. I will trip and fall over it for you. And conservatives say, nope. Basically wiping their slate clean, and now you have nothing to charge them with, and the Democrats can go ahead and take that and put that accusation on you. That's how it's been, and conservatives have been doing this for years, and I've been warning of it for years. Don't give this to them. When they say there's systemic racism, yeah, you're right. In every place it is, that's where you control things. That's you. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
So there's no white privilege, really. Well, I noticed that during that, and I talked about this just a little while ago, we have this horrible issue. Well, you got Democrats trying to make it as bad as another 9/11. But we saw somebody lose their life on January 6th. And that white person who shot Ashley Babbitt is still going free. Somebody got their life taken that day, and people got taken to jail, and they're still there. But I noticed that between this person, Hillary Clinton, Anthony Fauci, all the stuff that they're doing, they're the ones who are pulling the strings. They're the ones with all the power. They're the ones sitting at the top of this power, the supremacy. That's them. Sure, they got their lackeys of different colors and all that sort of stuff. They're still doing their bidding. So
yeah,
when we let these people go and do that and say that there is none, well, that's the tool that they continue to beat us over the head with. It's not a good idea to just be overly skeptic and just reject what they say. Sometimes you can use that stuff against them.
Yeah, so you're saying that they come at us with this sword and we throw ourselves on the sword when we could, in fact, disarm them, take the sword, and use the sword against them
Absolutely.
with great effect.
Yes.
Yeah, and you've mentioned this many times before, and you're absolutely right. Like, for example, I saw just a couple days ago, and when I say saw, I could watch about as much as I could bear, about 10 seconds, of Joe Biden passing this historic anti-lynching legislation. And I only saw Kamala Harris saying, do you know that, with all these lynchings that happened, that there is still no anti-lynching laws on the book, that an anti-lynching law has never been passed by the federal government to, shame, shame, shame. And I asked myself, what about first-degree murder laws? Do we have any of those? Has first-degree murder ever been used to prosecute in a case like this? So when you see this kind of kabuki, it's exactly what you were talking about. You want to say, your first reaction is to want to say there hasn't been a lynching in this country in nearly 100 years. But that's kind of what they want you to say.
Right.
What you need to say is the people who did all the lynching were you guys. I'd feel much better about an anti-democrat law than an anti-lynching law, because let's get to the root cause of the problem here, right? Then you get to bring up the KKK and the Jim Crow laws and all of Lester Maddox and all of these guys, all Democrats, all of them. But kind of back up to the bigger picture here. I'm working on a series of afterburners on the Great Reset, because I didn't come up with that term, and when I look at some of these things I'm seeing, and I ask myself, are these things true or am I losing my mind? What I have to come up with sometimes is I have to come up with, did this particular thing happen, yes or no? And the Hillary thing happened, yes. The FBI thing happened, yes. The suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop, yes, that happened. Jeffrey Epstein happened, yes, that happened. And guys like the World Economic Forum are basically talking about, how they're going to have one world economy. That happened. People in the high-tech business are talking about how we can hack human beings, not only predict what you can do, but determine what you can do. Yes, that's happening. These guys do meet once or twice a year, just all of the tech people. And this really happens. And if it didn't happen, if I didn't see video of them all getting off of their jets and walking together into some little villa, waving at the camera, if I didn't see that video with my own eyes, my natural inclination would be to say, no, life is it's too complex to have that kind of orchestration. But there it is. And I just wanted to do this topic because, frankly, I'd like to hear what people say about it, especially our members. I'd also like to know if anybody else out there is experiencing the same problem. And I guess finally, I'd like to know what you feel about it, because I had a friend who did. I just noticed on their Instagram feed, I've got a friend who's very deep into this stuff and started laying out some of this stuff, and a lot of people, basically gave her a lot of grief about it, saying, hey, this is just, this is around the bend, this is nutty, and her response was, well, I sourced it all with evidence, but I think a lot of people will not believe that there could be that kind of evil in the world, and that there could be that kind of damage done to our institutions that has been out of sight this whole time.
Oh, definitely, man. And just really quick, also to your point, with the lynching, the reason why we don't have those laws and they're trying to address it now was because Democrats themselves filibustered against it. You have Republicans say, hey, we need to knock it off with the lynching. You guys need to stop that. Okay. But just like you said, it's already written. You can't deprive somebody of their life without due process of law. You can't just go form a mob and go lynch people. But Democrats have a nasty habit of doing that.
Yeah,
so
they do.
But
and then taking credit for stopping it afterwards.
Yeah. It's like, no, that wasn't y'all. and it just like they do with a lot of stuff. But the thing is, Bill, you can have evidence, and we talked about this before, man, where people will just reject truth, reject proof. You can have the proof sitting right there in front, man. We can have video. going all even way back to Michael Brown. You got video of this dude robbing a liquor store and stuff like that. But no, he's a good kid. That's why, even having the cops go out there with video on them, they're still going to question that. They're still going to scrutinize it. I mean, even right now, people can look at things with their own eyes, man, and still, be overly skeptical. The Will Smith slap. There's argument if it was a real slap. You got video of Chris Rock being slapped. Was it staged? Was it real? It's like, wow, man. I mean, you can have, and the thing is, Bill, the Bible warns of this stuff. People who just gonna have scales of their eyes, they'll look truth. Man, it's like they wouldn't know the truth if it died for them. They looked truth right in the eye, slapped him, spit in his face, and hung him on a stick. That's what we do. We take truth and people just, wow.
Kill it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it.
You mentioned body cams just a second ago, and I realize that's when I try to determine where I sit on the skepticism versus naivete spectrum. I certainly tend towards naivete. I have a hard time understanding how people could sell out their country for money. I understand it, and I know it happens. I just can't process it. Likewise, I can't process this need to own everything. I don't care what other people own. I don't care how nice somebody else's car or house is. It doesn't affect me at all, but it affects some people. So when I get down to where I believe and where I fall on the spectrum, it really does, for me, come down to body cam footage. I know that after the George Floyd thing, there was another case of a white police officer shot a black man, but there was body cam footage or something, and it was clear that there was a life and death struggle going on. And likewise, I think we saw one case where this woman just opened fired, and so I'm using body cam footage as a metaphor, obviously, but for me, I think, well, Carl Sagan said that extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and to me, video evidence or something like that is what it takes to move me. And I only move as far as that evidence will go. The problem is I keep seeing new evidence. But I think that's probably the safest way to go through this life and all of this turmoil right now. The thesis of this series that I'm starting is that this is not a revolution. It's a counter-revolution, what we're watching now. It's an attempt of the aristocracy to return to the aristocracy, and I think the evidence for that is compelling, and I know a lot of people see what's going on. I'll just hand this back to you as my close. My feeling is say yes, definitely connect the dots, but before you connect the dots, make sure the dots are real.
Love it. And the thing is, speaking of the dots being connected and them being real, who's to determine? A lot of this stuff, it ends up being subjective, man. It's like you can have this evidence and truth right for it, but if they don't feel, right? It's like, a person can look down and see the twig and berries, but if they don't feel like they're a man, they're just going to go with the lie that they're a woman. But it's how they feel. You can have evidence like the Holocaust. You got people out there that just don't feel it was a real thing. They may feel like there's that. They're just, people couldn't possibly.
Was a real thing, or people who feel like it was a real thing or not a real thing?
They don't feel like it was a real thing. It never happened.
Oh, I just want to make sure you're clear on that. Yes, there are people who still deny it. Yes, that it happened.
Holocaust, deniers, or it wasn't really about race, things like that they'll go with. It comes down to this feeling, their truth, and there can't be their truth or my truth, or there's just only one truth.
That's exactly it.
And those things, I think they're deficiencies. It's a deficiency to have this subjective view of truth. Like I'll give you an example. I think one of there's an adage that people accept as absolute truth, while saying there's no such thing as absolutes. Talk about it. They don't believe in absolutes. Talk about a contradiction, right? But among these people, they stand by the adage of power corrupts, and power corrupts absolutely. I think that is one of the most untrue statements ever made. It's a total untruth. Power doesn't corrupt. Weakness does. If a person gets power and they are weak to their temptation to lord over people, then that is the thing that will do evil. Weakness is a form of decay. If your morality decays, if your integrity decays, if you have power, if the morality in you decays, that is weakness, and that is what you will be given over to.
That's a good point.
Weakness, it takes power to refrain from doing evil to people. It takes that, that willpower. Weakness is a funny thing, Bill, because weakness is like, it's not to say that weakness doesn't have a force of its own. Weakness is a negative. It's a negative force. It's like a black hole, right? And you don't want to get caught in that black hole. It's kind of hard to escape from. But the weakness itself is what drives people to do evil, and they have the power to do that. But it's not the power that's making them do evil. It's like I say, if power really corrupted, well, God would be corrupt. If absolute power corrupted, well, God would be absolutely corrupt. So just because a person has power, it doesn't mean that they're corrupt, because it takes power to withstand corruption. It's the weakness that corrupts. But people have an emotional attachment because that's something that they heard and it rung true with them for a minute. But I think it rings true and they cling to that on an emotional level. Because, it's kind of like the have-not mentality, or, you kind of, the viewing the power as a separate people that you're going to have this arm's length with. I think it's a lot of that. But when you really get down to it, it's the weakness of people that corrupts. Yeah.
There's just a lot of weakness out there. And I think that the way the power works is it's so seductive.
Yes.
That it breeds weakness. It amplifies weakness.
Yes.
And over time, it erodes whatever moral core you may have. That's why if I was granted absolute power, I think that I might make a couple of very quick edicts, and then the last of which would be, I hereby renounce this absolute power. Do it before it got to me. I'm not even sure I would do the edicts, to be honest with you.
Like Lord of the Rings.
That's right. That's it. My precious. I'll do it for this edition of The Virtue Signal, made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com. It's always great to hear your comments and feedback, not only on YouTube, but especially on the members-only site and on forums and all that stuff. So for Alfonso, Rachel, I'm Bill Whittle. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.